Having given her sleight of hand stamp of approval to the birthers, Sarah Palin is now moving on to an almost equally popular far-right mythology, climate change denial. In our #1 story in the countdown, Sister Sarah goes op-ed, and former Vice President and Nobel Peace Prize winner Al Gore responds to her, quote, era of unreality, getting her facts wrong and misrepresenting her record as governor of Alaska again. Not enough for Palin's latest foray into opinion piece, this one for the Washington Post. So she went into full-on denial, climate change is all political mode. Referring to the president's role in the upcoming International Climate Conference in Copenhagen, quote, instead of staying home from Copenhagen and sending a message that the United States will not be a party to fraudulent scientific practices, the president has upped the ante. He plans to fly in at the climax of the conference in hopes of sealing a deal. What Obama really hopes to bring home from Copenhagen is more pressure to pass the Democrats' cap and tax proposal. This is a political move. The last thing America needs is misguided legislation that will raise taxes and cost jobs, particularly when the push for such legislation rests on agenda-driven science. The president should boycott Copenhagen. And since hackers have uncovered the emails of one climate research unit, which let its ambition for publication lead to massaging of data, climate change deniers like Palin are crying climategate. But when our own Andrew Mitchell asked the former vice president about Palin's claims, Mr. Gore drilled, baby, drilled.
Global warming deniers persist in this air of unreality. After all, the entire North Polar ice cap, which has been there for most of the last 3 million years, is disappearing before our eyes. What do they think is causing this?
Mr. Gore also cited the long list of other recent tangible effects of climate change, like record storms, droughts, fires. And when asked about Palin's claim on her Facebook page that these are, quote, doomsday scare tactics pushed by environmental priesthood.
The scientific community has worked very intensively for 20 years within this international process, and they now say the evidence is unequivocal. 150 years ago this year was the discovery that CO2 traps heat. That is a principle in physics. It's not a question of debate. It's like gravity. It exists.
Well, now we're going to bring in gravity, huh? By the way, Sister Sarah, even if all you anti-factualists were right, climate change was entirely cyclical, not at all man-made, what would be the agenda, as you call it, carried out in its name? As Thomas Friedman noted recently, our nation's economy would be powered by more energy sources, wind, solar, cleaner biofuels. New electric cars would run on batteries. America would become less dependent on foreign oil dictators. Our trade deficit would improve. Agenda-driven insanity indeed. Let's turn now to the Washington editor of The Nation, Chris Hayes. Chris, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
Why did the Washington Post let us get lectured about science and politics by somebody who quit her only statewide office and has a pastor who runs these precautionary exorcisms on her so she can stave off witchcraft?
Well, I thought it was a really atrocious decision on the part of the Washington Post to run this op-ed. I mean, what exactly it contributed to the debate. There are people like Greg Mankiw, who's worked in the Bush White House. He's an economist at Harvard. He's a very conservative guy. He strongly opposes the cap and trade. He wants to see a carbon tax. I mean, there are people that there is a debate to be had. But to give over your op-ed page to someone who makes essentially a conspiracy theory claim, it would be like if they turned it over to someone who wanted to argue that 9/11 was an inside job. Mm-hmm. The Washington Post would never in a million years do that, and they shouldn't be doing this.
From Mrs. Palin's point of view, from this GOP point of view, is this at all about getting elected anymore, or is this just a kind of political cover for big business, keeping the country safe for polluters for another hour or another month or another year or whatever it is they can manage?
Well, luckily, they go hand in hand. I mean, I actually think what's motivating Palin, and you can actually see she has moved in the direction of the conspiracy theorists on this issue. What's motivating her is the fact that the polling on this is really disturbing because it has become a kind of article of faith among the right-wing base that this is a grand socialist conspiracy to usher in state control. And so I think she's really, as she is wont to do, pandering to that base right now. I think what's driving that kind of op-ed more than any kind of big business shilling is the fact that it has become one of these issues like the birth certificate that you can sort of win points with the base with.
And by the way, the video we're seeing right now, that was taken in July in Washington, D.C. I'm not saying it's a problem. All right, that's a bad joke. I'm sorry. But let's put all these points together here about now the the predilections of the far right and what they believe and what they don't. What is the Palin explanation for polar ice melting, which she acknowledges? I mean, if it is witchcraft,
right,
why has she not sent Pastor Muthi to fix it? And a kind of slightly more serious version of that, if this is not man-made, if it, as part of the right-wing agenda, is all, you know, should be theocratically interpreted, if it's all in God's hands, how come Sister Sarah, with her direct line to God, has not instructed God to fix this?
Well, you know, what's really interesting about this op-ed is that it's not even internally logically consistent conspiracy mongering, because there are two sort of you know, alternate theories of the conspiracy the denialists make. One is that yes, the world is warming, but it is not caused by humans. The other is the science that says that the world is warming is faked and part of the conspiracy, and she endorses both. I mean, it cannot; those both cannot obtain. The fact of the matter is, she governed the one state in the Union that is most immediately seeing the effects of climate change. The permafrost is actually melting. There are houses that have cracked because of it in the state of Alaska, and because of that, she was forced to kind of acknowledge the fact warming is happening. So she can't have it both ways. And the editors of the Washington Post didn't see fit to make any kind of intervention to at least have, you know, a logically consistent a piece of work on their pages.
Which brings up the idea of an end game for the GOP and Palin. What is the end game? Let's say they are 100% right that climategate exists, that this is a scam, that changes in climate are natural. Do they have a plan for how to keep the government together to criminalize abortion during the rapture and the upcoming ice age and or universal sweat lodge, whichever comes first?
You know, I don't know what the right-wing governance plan is, but I will say on an extremely serious note that this, you know, we talked about this in a million different ways in Al Gore, and there are a lot of messengers who are better at this than I am. But it's hard to overstate the stakes right now in Copenhagen, in the climate change legislation moving through the Congress. I mean, we are at a sort of pivotal moment in the sort of fate of the earth, but also as a test of the moral fabric of American democracy. And, you know, history is going to look extremely, extremely unkindly on this op-ed and the people that are using their platform to sort of propagate this very monstrous deception.
Yeah, but remember, the city of Washington and the Washington Post will be completely underwater within 10 years anyway. Chris, on that cheery note, Chris Hayes of The Nation. Great, thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Keith.
That's countdown for this, the 414th day since the previous president declared mission accomplished in Iraq. And Keith Olbermann, good night and good luck.